A millionaire accidentally helped a homeless single mother and her sick son on the street during a rainy night. But a few weeks later, it was he who ended up in the hospital. The sky wasn't rainy, nor sunny, nor windy, just a plain, quiet day. The air was dry and slightly chilly, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The road was deserted, the ground dusted with fine dirt and scattered with a few dried leaves. Not a soul passed by. The silence wasn't loud, but it pressed down, like a question left unanswered, or a verdict yet to be pronounced. At a small bend in the road, where there were no signs and no houses in sight, Elena leaned against a pile of gravel. In her arms was Milo, 8 years old, slipping in and out of consciousness from a high fever. The child trembled uncontrollably, his breathing shallow, his cheeks burning red like fire, and a trickle of blood marked his forehead from a head injury sustained earlier. Elena shifted to hold him tighter. The bruise on her right cheek had begun to bleed again. Her dress was smeared with mud and ash. No one saw them. No one bothered to care. Sometimes, pain just isn't loud enough to make anyone turn their head. 3 hours earlier, Eleanor was still standing in the courtyard of the Voss estate. The horror began when she carried Milo down from the bedroom to the living room. Gareth, the half-brother of Eleanor's late husband, Andrew, and a cold-hearted accomplice, blocked the door. His face was stone. Behind him stood Margaret, Elena's mother-in-law, her eyes dry as dust, showing not even a trace of tears for her son who had just passed away. "What are you still doing here?" Margaret asked, her voice low, yet each word fell like a hammer. "Andrew is dead, and we will not harbor a traitor in this house." Elena stood still, only tightening her arms around her son. Milo was burning up. His eyes were shut tight, breath coming fast and shallow. She didn't want to argue. She didn't want to beg. She only needed one night, just a place for her son to rest until morning. "Milo is sick," she said softly, not looking at anyone. "He needs rest. I'll leave in the morning." Gareth let out a short, bitter laugh, then stepped forward and slapped her hard without warning. Eleanor staggered, but didn't fall. Milo whimpered faintly in his fevered sleep. "Your husband died because of women like you," Gareth spat. "He knew. He found out you were sneaking around with your ex. It tore him apart, so much he burned himself alive." "No," Eleanor cried, eyes blazing. "I didn't betray him. I never—" Margaret cut her off, her voice calm, as though rehearsed for years. "Andrew left me a message. He said that if he died, the one to blame was the wife who didn't know how to stay faithful. I don't need a court to tell me what's right. My conscience has already judged you." 2 maids emerged, tossing Elena's suitcase onto the front steps. The lock popped open, Milo's clothes spilling onto the ground. His old stuffed bear landed in a puddle, soaking in muddy water. Elena's body had no strength left. She only knew that her arms hurt from holding her child too tightly, that her feet slipped on the wet stone floor, and that the sound of the door slamming shut behind her was the heaviest sound she had ever heard in her life. The small truck Margaret arranged to dump Eleanor and Milo had stopped by the roadside. The driver opened the back door, not even looking over his shoulder. "Out! Where are we?" "As far from the Voss name as possible," he sneered. "You're lucky Margaret let you keep the kid. If it were up to me, I'd have tossed him out long ago." They were left there. No one knew. No one waited. No one remembered. After a long business trip, Lucian Granger was also on his way back to the city. He sat in the back seat of a Maybach, gazing out the window. This used to be the area he lived in with his wife and young daughter before a tragic accident took both away. Every road, every turn once echoed with laughter, and then with tears. The car came to a sudden stop. "There's something ahead," the driver said. A woman, curled up beside a pile of gravel, clutching a child. Both looked barely alive. Lucien stepped out. His eyes locked onto the scene, an image painfully familiar to one he had once been too late to save. He knelt beside them. "The boy needs a doctor," he said. The woman didn't answer. Her swollen red eyes opened slightly. Her lips were dry, but her voice was steady. "We're not asking for pity." "I'm not offering it," he replied. "This is my decision." Gently, he lifted the boy into his arms. The child didn't cry, didn't speak, only let out a faint sound, the last flicker of instinct still burning. The mother stood, staggering, then gripped the car door. "Let me come with you. No matter the danger, I can't leave my son." Lucien nodded. No more questions, no need for names. In that moment he knew. If he drove past, another child would vanish from this world, and this time he refused to turn away. Lucien carried Milo into the car. Elena followed close behind, her thin body trembling from the cold, but her eyes never leaving her son. As the car pulled away from the edge of the village, Elena clutched the spare coat she had found on the back seat and turned to Lucien. Her bloodshot eyes held no hatred, no plea, only one thing: survival. Lucien glanced at the rearview mirror, saw Milo's eyes half closed in his mother's arms. He said nothing, but his hand tightened around the steering wheel. Tonight, he wasn't just picking up two lost souls. He was reclaiming a part of himself, one he had lost on a rainy night long ago. The car sped off into the dark. For the first time in years, Lucien had stopped in the middle of the road to save a future slipping out of someone's grasp, just as his once had. And perhaps this was a beginning. The private hospital was tucked deep within a quiet street, far from the city's flashing lights and prying eyes. The air carried a faint scent of antiseptic. In the emergency room, a soft white light cast a pale glow on Milo's face as he lay unconscious under a thin blanket. An IV line was hooked to his arm. His breathing had become steadier, but he hadn't yet woken up. Elena sat beside the bed. The coat a nurse had given her was now dry, but her eyes remained wet. She didn't cry out loud, but her whole body felt like a stone worn down by wind and rain. Her chin was bruised, her hands scraped from falling while carrying her son in the rain. Her nails were broken, stained with dried blood. She didn't care. She kept her eyes on Milo, as if he were the last thread tying her to this world. Lucien stood near the door. He didn't look directly at the mother and child. His gaze was fixed on his own soaked shoes. Then, after a while, he asked quietly, "Why were you out in the middle of the road like that, in a place no one ever passes?" His voice wasn't sharp, not accusatory, but it pierced through the silence, like a quiet wind cutting through skin. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She lifted her head. Her eyes held no panic now, only the calm of someone who'd already been torn apart from the inside out. "Because they didn't want to see me anymore," she said softly. "Because they think I killed my husband." Lucien's brows furrowed, not out of shock, but because of how plainly she said it, like it was a fact. "I don't have the papers. No lawyer. No one on my side. Just a feverish child and a suitcase thrown down the steps. Dis. She didn't cry. Didn't offer details. Didn't mention Margaret or Gareth. She didn't speak of the slaps or the insults. But in the way she said, "a suitcase thrown down the steps," anyone listening would know. That wasn't just an action. That was a sentence. "I don't need you to believe me," Elena went on, her voice hoarse but firm. "I just need a place where my son can survive. The rest, if I have to die because I can't prove I'm innocent, then so be it." Lucien said nothing. He stood still, trapped between two echoes, one from the present, one from the past. Milo remained unconscious for another 2 hours. The doctor explained it was due to dehydration, low blood sugar, and prolonged exhaustion. The boy would need to be closely monitored and kept at full rest for the next few days. Lucienne returned to the room with 2 cups of hot coffee. Elena was sitting by the window, looking out over the empty courtyard. She didn't take the coffee he placed on the table. She didn't refuse it either. She didn't even look. There was a long silence before Elena finally spoke. "My name is Elena," she said, as if out of a habit left over from a time when she was still treated like a human being. The man raised his eyebrows slightly, then replied, "Lucienne Granger." "That's my name." Elena turned to look at him, for the first time, truly seeing him. "Thank you, Lucienne." He shrugged. "I only did what anyone should do, but not everyone would." A fleeting smile crossed her face, faint and sad. "I once failed someone," Lucienne added, "not because I didn't want to help, but because I got there too late. Just a few minutes. A few minutes can mean a whole lifetime." Elena said nothing more, but for the first time, her shoulders dropped just a little. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of Milo whispering her name. She leaned down, pressing her hand to his forehead. The boy opened his eyes, lips dry, and murmured, "Mum, I saw Dad. He said if something happens, I need to find Uncle Henry." Elena froze. Henry, Andrew's trusted senior, a cybersecurity engineer. The man Andrew once said, "If anything ever happens to me, Henry will know." Lucienne was sitting out in the hallway, reading a file. Elena stepped out and stood in front of him for a few seconds before speaking. "My husband, Andrew Voss, he once said, if anything happened to him, I should find Henry. But after the funeral, I never saw him again. I heard he had an accident, then disappeared. Andrew used to work for Voss Group. He was one of their top engineers. Just mention his name, and people at the company will know. But I think maybe he found out something dark, and they were watching him." Lucienne looked up, his expression shifting. He was no longer a stranger. He set the file down. "Tell me more. Who exactly is Henry?" He was Andrew's only real mentor. They worked together. Henry was in charge of internal security. 2 months ago, Andrew started noticing strange spending patterns in the company. He told me something was wrong. Then a week before he died, he left me one message. "If anything happens to me, don't trust anyone." Lucian sat up straighter. His voice grew low. "Do you have his address?" Elena shook her head. "I have an old number, but it doesn't work anymore. All I know is that he used to live in Greenhill, on the south side of the city." Lucienne nodded, his eyes distant. He didn't say anything more. That evening, while sitting beside a sleeping Milo, Elena noticed a business card on the table. On the back, a handwritten note read, "When you're ready, I'll still be here." Beneath it, Lucian Granger. She stared at the words for a long time, then slipped the card into her pocket, holding on to something she couldn't yet believe in, but didn't have the strength to turn away from. Behind her, the child stirred in his sleep, and inside her, there was still no trace of sunlight, and she knew, until the truth behind Andrew's death was uncovered, the rain inside her would never stop. Lucienne left the hospital hallway just as the clock struck 11 p.m. He didn't say another word to Elena, but before stepping into the elevator, he turned, looking back at the door to the room where mother and son rested. That look wasn't one of pity, nor was it the look of a man playing hero. It was the look of someone who had seen too much loss, and this time would not let it happen again. He stepped out of the hospital with a worn-out folder in hand. One name underlined in red: Henry Caldwell, the last man her husband had trusted. In the car, Lucienne stared out the window, deep in thought, then quietly said to the driver, "Help me find Henry, Andrew Voss's mentor, if he really went missing after the accident. I want to know exactly why." The driver nodded, taking the order without hesitation. The sky the next morning was still overcast, as if hinting at something looming on the horizon. Lucien stood by the office window, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He didn't drink it, just stared at the glass, at the reflection of his own face. Hardened, silent, but his eyes had changed. Something had pulled him out of the closed world he had built for himself and placed him into the story of a woman he had originally intended to save, only for a moment. The phone rang. His assistant reported, "I've found Mr. Henry's previous address, but he no longer lives there. Someone mentioned he was in a car accident a few months ago and was moved to a memory rehabilitation center in the suburbs." Lucien hung up. He stood still for a moment, then grabbed his coat. "Get the car ready. I want to go there." On the drive to the care facility, Lucien sat quietly, eyes fixed on the window. In his mind, he saw Eleanor and Milo lying weak and cold by the roadside, a mother shielding her son like a living shield. He remembered the silence in her eyes. No hatred, no pleading, just one message. "Don't leave us." The driver didn't dare turn on the radio. The air inside the car was thick with silence. At the small medical facility on the outskirts of town, Lucien walked down a quiet corridor. The potted plants were old, the cement planters stained with time. The scent of disinfectant mixed with faint incense gave the place an eerie chill. He met the head nurse, a middle-aged woman in glasses with a slow, steady voice. "Mr. Henry is currently being treated for mild memory loss. His short-term memory comes and goes, but he's still fairly sharp when talking about someone named Andrew." Lucien entered Henry's room. The old man sat by a chessboard, fingers slowly touching the black and white pieces like an old habit. When he saw Lucien, he looked up, his gaze cautious, and closed off. "You are a friend of Andrew's. I need to know what you once told him." Henry squinted, one hand gripping a chess piece, the other bracing against the table as if preparing to stand. "People have come pretending to be his friend, trying to dig for information. I may have memory loss, but that doesn't make me stupid." Lucien didn't react with anger. He calmly pulled out his phone, opened a photo, and placed it on the table. It was a still from his dashcam. In the image, Eleanor and Milo lay curled up on the roadside. No lights, no shelter, no one around. Just a mother holding her unconscious child. A scene so quiet, it pierced the heart. "What reason would I have to fake this?" Lucien asked, his voice hoarse. Henry stared at the screen. First, focus, then silence. His eyes slowly turned red. He drew a deep breath, but couldn't hold it long. His hand trembled, and the chess pieces fell loudly to the tiled floor. "So, it's come to this," he said quietly. "He told me once, if he died, find the boy. He might be the only one who can open the box." "What box?" Lucien asked. Henry leaned back, eyes on his frail, spotted hands. "There are some things I shouldn't have kept, but I did, and now I'm not sure I remember it all." He tapped his chest. "But I recorded it, in a box, before the accident happened." Lucien sat down across from him. "Where is that box?" Henry gave a wrinkled smile. "Only the kid knows how to open it. That's what his father said. The password is a song, but I've forgotten which one." A breeze drifted through the window, scattering a few chess pieces. Lucien didn't notice. He was watching Henry's eyes, now soft, no longer guarded. "You trusted Andrew, didn't you?" Lucien asked. Henry looked at him, answering slowly. "Enough to carry a secret that could get me killed. But sometimes, when you carry something too long, you get tired. And then the accident. Who knows if it was chance or a warning?" Lucien sat motionless in the long pause that followed. Everything was beginning to connect. Henry had known. He had tried to protect it. And perhaps someone had tried to get rid of him, but failed. That afternoon, a blurry video suddenly went viral on social media. An anonymous segment from a minor news channel claimed Eleanor had met with a mysterious man shortly after her husband's funeral. The footage was unclear, faces were not identifiable, but enough to spark suspicion: the Voss widow and her secret lover. Tabloids were quick to amplify it with sensational headlines. The truth behind the cold-hearted widow. Wife of engineer Voss, double-faced or deceptive victim. The comment sections overflowed with contempt. Knew it. You can tell she's fake just by looking at her. There's no smoke without fire. Poor kid, what chance does he have with a mum like that? Elena stared at the clip on the nurse's phone. Her hands trembled, but her face remained calm. She whispered, "They've started." The nurse said nothing. A single drop fell from her hair. Whether leftover rain or a tear falling for Eleanor was unclear. Late that night, Lucien returned to the hospital. He entered the waiting room and found Eleanor sitting alone. The dim yellow light cast her shadow long and thin, just like her. "You once said they didn't want to see you anymore," Lucien began. "Now they want to make sure no one else dares to." Eleanor clenched her fists. "I'm not afraid of being misunderstood. I'm afraid Milo will grow up in a story twisted out of truth." Lucien handed her a file. "I'm not going to let that happen. Not again." Eleanor looked up at him. Her eyes were dark with exhaustion, but there was a spark. Not hope, but defiance. That night, she sat by the hospital window, holding Milo in her arms. The pale light of the room wasn't warm, but for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. Somewhere out there, a man with a frozen heart had begun to thaw, not out of duty, but because he saw something he once lost, in the eyes of a boy refusing to give up. And as the past began to resurface, the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would find its way back. The sky remained overcast the next morning. Lucien stood by the window in his office, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He didn't drink it, just stared into the glass, at the reflection of his own face, firm, silent. But his eyes had changed. Something had pulled him out of the closed world he had built, and placed him inside the story of a woman he had once intended to save for just a moment. Elsewhere, Margaret and Gareth sat in the office of attorney Daniel Crowe. "Do something," Margaret said coldly. "Make sure they can't survive this." Daniel nodded. On the table lay a red folder, filled with doctored photos, altered psychological evaluations, and a false statement from a non-existent witness. She'll be painted as a mentally unstable woman, dangerous to her own child, and not credible. "And the boy?" Gareth asked, eyes fixed on the lighter in his hand. "The sooner he's separated from her, the easier he'll be to control," Daniel replied. The media spread the narrative like wildfire. Comments flooded in, "Where there's smoke, there's fire. Her husband just died, and she's already with someone else? Terrifying. That poor kid should be placed in a protection center." The online atmosphere turned toxic. Groups shared edited images, fabricated stories. People who once knew Elena began to distance themselves. Old friends deleted her number. Messages of sympathy turned into suspicion and judgment. Even Milo's school, though he was still in the hospital, wasn't spared the storm. Rumors reached both parents and students. An anonymous post appeared in the parents' group claiming Elena had a mental history, and that Milo might be behaviorally unstable. Some parents began calling the school, demanding that Milo's enrollment be suspended to protect the learning environment. An emergency internal meeting was held. Later that day, the principal called Eleanor. His voice was polite, but emotionless, like reading from a pre-approved script. "Miss Eleanor, The school proposes to temporarily pause Milo's enrollment until the media attention dies down. This is not a disciplinary action, just a temporary measure to protect both parties. Elena clenched the phone, eyes fixed on Milo as he slept. He wasn't being expelled. He was being erased from normal life, punished for a guilt that was never his. She walked into the hospital bathroom, locked the door, and stood before the mirror. Her face was pale, eyes sunken. She turned on the faucet and let the water run, as if hoping it could wash away the mounting pressure. She bit her lip, holding back tears, not out of strength, but because she didn't want Milo to see her break. That night, Elena sat quietly in the hospital room, watching over Milo. She said nothing, didn't defend herself. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Texts from former friends, neighbors, even those who once offered sympathy. Every word was like a needle, pricking at wounds that hadn't had time to heal. A soft knock on the door. Lucien entered, holding a paper bag. He didn't say anything, just set it on the table. Milk, fruit, a few coloring books. His eyes paused on her phone screen. "What's going on?" he asked. Elena nodded slightly. Her eyes were red, but dry. They don't care about the truth. They just want a story that's easy to share. Lucien sat down beside her. She turned to him. "The school says it's temporary, to avoid media impact, but I know it's because of pressure from parents." Elena clenched her fists. Her eyes dropped, then lifted again, pained, but sharp. "They want me to lose it, to scream, to break down, so I'll prove them right." Lucien paused for a second. "Then don't give them what they want." He pulled out another folder. "This is a contract to hire legal representation. Not Daniel Crow. Someone independent and neutral." Eleanor looked at the lawyer's name. "You're trusting me?" "I trust Milo," Lucien said calmly. "I've never spoken to the boy, but I met Henry. He and Andrew trusted that child. They were smart enough to put their faith in the right place. If both of them believed Milo was worth protecting, then I think, at the very least, I should stand on his side." Elena looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes held more than fatigue. Something quiet stirred, like a door she thought was closed had just creaked open, because a stranger chose not to walk away. Lucien didn't stop at hiring a lawyer. He began reviewing the financial system of Voss Group, the corporation his own family once held shares in generations ago. Back when his parents were alive, the Granger family owned 12% of the company's non-operational stock. Though most had been sold off, Lucien still had faint ties to the internal audit board. Being drawn into Elena's situation made Lucien question the very thing that had once driven him to retreat from the business world: corruption. And once again, the name Granger was being pulled back into that vortex. He started with Voss's public financial reports. Over the years, he'd learned how to read what wasn't written on paper, how money was divided, contracts routed through intermediaries, and administrative fees that grew without explanation. He reached out to an old friend, the head of internal audit, who had once worked closely with Andrew. After a few cautious questions, the man sighed and secretly handed Lucien a copy of an audit report that had been buried right before Andrew's death. Andrew requested an independent audit, but Sylvia shut it down. After that, well, you know what happened. Lucien traced the financial trails. Sylvia Thorne, chairwoman of a subsidiary company, appeared in numerous suspicious transactions. Funds routed through a bank in Malta, then into a shell company in Switzerland. These records had been buried under layers of independent audits. But Lucien, using his passive access rights, began peeling back the layers. He called a private meeting. The internal finance investigation team confirmed. Signs of money laundering had occurred over the past 3 years. Funds were funneled to offshore shell companies and later returned to Voss as strategic investments. Every lead pointed to Sylvia. She wasn't just the one who signed off, she actively participated in project review meetings. In an internal voice recording found on the company's server, Sylvia could be heard saying, "Andrew was too curious. If he didn't die, the whole system would have collapsed." Lucian turned off the recording. His hand tightened. Every suspicion now had weight. And Elena wasn't just a victim of a broken family, she was a piece of a dark maze he had once refused to walk into. In the hospital room, Elena read a copy of the preliminary investigation report. She glanced at Milo, coloring. His hand was still weak, but his eyes had regained their light. "Milo will be grateful to you," she said softly. Lucian looked at her. "I'm not doing this, so he'll be grateful. I'm doing it because I can't forgive silence. Not one more time." Milo looked up and handed his mother a drawing. "I drew a house with 3 people. Mommy, me, and Uncle Lucien." Elena froze, then leaned down and hugged her son, and for the first time in days, she let herself cry. Not out of fear, but because she finally knew she wasn't alone anymore. Lucien turned his face away, but his eyes were no longer made of stone. The next day at the hospital, Milo sat drawing in silence. He was coloring a picture of a man placing his hand on a metal box inside a room full of books. "Who is that?" Elena asked gently, stroking her son's hair. "He's Dad's uncle," Milo replied. "Once, Dad took me there and said that's where he hid a secret. Inside a big black box with a lock. Dad said, I'm the one who keeps the code." Lucian shot up at those words. He stared at Milo, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Do you remember where that box was?" Milo nodded. "In the basement, next to the bookshelf. There was a wooden dog sitting on top." The next morning, Lucian drove to Henry's old house, the one that had been sealed off. He used an old access card Henry had once entrusted to him and stepped into a space covered in dust. The basement was cold and damp, but exactly as Milo described, a wooden dog figurine beside a bookshelf, and below it, embedded into the wall, a heavy, sealed black metal box. Lucian knelt down. The box had a combination lock. He tried a few numbers, but failed. It wouldn't open. Still, he knew he was close. He ran his hand across the box's surface and whispered, "Milo, only you can open this." Lucian stood up, eyes still fixed on the box, as if trying to memorize every scratch on its surface. He returned to the car in silence and drove straight back to the hospital. This time, he didn't rush to tell Milo. Instead, he met Elena in the hallway. When he told her he had found the box but couldn't open it, her eyes lit up. Then, she clenched her fists. If it's something Andrew left behind, Milo will be able to open it, but he's still weak. If he fails, he'll feel guilty. Please give it a few more days." Lucian nodded. They stood there for a moment, neither saying more, but there was a quiet understanding between them, like a thread tied to the same knot. 3 days later, Milo was discharged from the hospital. He was still frail, but able to eat and sleep regularly. Elena packed their things in silence, folding Milo's little robe with a sigh. She didn't know where they would go. Their old apartment had been broken into, and their belongings sealed due to pending legal disputes. Lucien stood at the doorway, without knocking. He looked at the mother and son, then spoke. "I have a house in the countryside. No one goes there. It's clean, quiet. You can stay there for a while." Elena turned, surprised and guarded. "We can't accept any more favors." Lucien's tone didn't change. "I'm not offering it for you. I'm doing it for Milo." The room fell silent. Elena lowered her head and looked at her son. Milo was carefully packing his small pillow into a bag, his face brighter than usual. Would you like to stay somewhere with big trees, like in your drawings? Elena asked softly. Milo nodded quickly. If I can run around, then I'd love it. Elena turned to Lucienne. She didn't say anything, but for the first time, she nodded, slowly and clearly. The countryside house stood nestled among quiet hills, shaded by blooming cherry trees. Its dark grey roof, low fence and wide backyard didn't scream wealth. It wasn't the kind of mansion one would expect from a millionaire, but it felt like a home where children's laughter once echoed. Lucienne opened the door and let Elena step in first. She walked slowly, her eyes drifting over framed photos on the walls. Some turned face down, others left empty. Did someone used to live here? Elena asked softly. Lucienne didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and drew open the curtains, letting sunlight flood in. No one's laughed here in a long time. Elena held Milo tightly as they entered the bright living room. The scent of wood and fresh light lifted something heavy from her chest. She turned to Lucienne and said quietly, "Thank you." Lucienne shook his head. "I'm doing it for Milo." Elena nodded, but deep down she knew, if it were only for Milo, this man would not have come this far. That first night in their new home, Milo slept soundly on a soft bed. Elena sat on the balcony, cool wind brushing her cheek. Lucienne brought out 2 cups of tea. He placed one in front of her, then sat across. They said nothing for a while, just the wind and the quiet of night passed between them. "I had a daughter once," Lucienne said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "She used to color drawings, just like those. Ones I'm too afraid to hang up now." Eleanor turned to him, surprised. Lucienne had never spoken about himself before. "She passed from an illness, and I didn't make it back in time," he continued. "I know what it's like to arrive too late." Elena didn't reply, but she placed her hand gently on the teacup, close to his. Darkness slowly filled the sky, but in that house, a soft golden light remained. A child's even breathing replaced the nightmares, and 2 adults, who didn't belong to each other, were slowly finding something like trust, born from wounds that had yet to fully close. After their first peaceful night in the new house, the next morning felt different. The sky was no longer grey, but gently sunlit. The long, unused kitchen came to life with the smell of fried shallots, the soft sizzle of a pan, and the gentle bubbling of boiling water. Lucienne, sleeves rolled up, was carefully seasoning a pot of chicken porridge. He wasn't a skilled cook, but his clumsy movements carried a quiet warmth. Hands that once only handled contracts and legal documents now sliced green onions, scrambled eggs, and watched the heat, each action a silent offering to the past. Elena stepped out from Milo's room, her hair still damp. The smell of porridge made her stop in her tracks. The last time she smelled home-cooked food was when Andrew was still alive, and this morning, seeing a man quietly tending to a kitchen for a child that wasn't his, tightened something in her chest. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, almost as a reflex. Lucienne didn't turn. "I used to think that too. Then one day, I wished I had cooked just one more meal for someone who's no longer here. But I didn't make it in time." Eleanor didn't respond. She stepped forward and poured 2 glasses of water. They stood side by side, not intruding on each other's space. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt shared. Milo peeked out from the door, still groggy but beaming at the smell. "Is there a sunny side-up egg?" Lucienne smiled. "There is, but you have to finish your porridge first. Then I'll eat 2 bowls." Milo's laughter filled the kitchen, echoing off the walls. Elena lowered her head, ran a hand through his hair, but tears had already touched the corners of her eyes. As the three of them sat at the table, no one said it aloud, but each of them felt it clearly. It had been a very long time since they had a real family meal, not because of the food, but because of the way they looked at each other, the presence, the understanding. Elena whispered, barely audible, "Thank you for letting us be people again, not just survivors." Lucienne looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Thank you for giving me a chance to start again." In that old house, the black box still sat in silence, like a memory under lock and key. But to Milo, it wasn't just an object. It was the last connection between him and the father he lost. And when the past begins to speak through a child's drawing, what the grown-ups tried to bury can no longer stay hidden. And you? Where are you right now? Maybe you're listening on your way to work, while cooking, or during a sleepless night. But if you can, leave a comment. Where are you listening to this story? And what made you stay until this chapter? We'd love to hear your story, because maybe, like Milo, you're carrying a piece of memory that's still waiting to be spoken. The afternoon sun dipped low. Light filtered through the trees in the yard, casting dappled patterns on the old walls of the quiet house. Eleanor was doing laundry in the corner of the yard, her hands working quickly, though her mind was elsewhere. On the doorstep, Milo sat drawing. He paused, looked up at the sunlight, then carefully tore a finished page from his sketchbook and ran inside. Lucienne was in the study, absorbed in old architectural blueprints of what used to be the Granger Group's industrial complex. Milo handed him the drawing without a word. In it was the familiar black box, and above it, a few simple musical notes. "Uncle Lucien, my dad used to sing this song every night," Milo said softly, "but only when I asked about the password. He said, 'The song has my name in it.'" Lucien was silent for a few seconds, not out of surprise, but from emotion. He gently placed a hand on Milo's head, stood up, and called out, "Elena." She walked in, still holding a damp cloth. The look in Lucien's eyes said everything. No need for a long explanation. She nodded. "Go," she said quietly. "If Andrew truly left something for our son, then he's ready." The car wound through the narrow, twisting hillside roads, leading them back to Henry's old house. The basement was cold and musty. The smell of metal and mold made Milo shiver, but he stepped down first, tightly gripping his mother's hand. Lucienne knelt before the black box. He brushed a hand over the number lock. "Are you sure?" Milo nodded, then sang quietly, like humming a familiar lullaby, M-I-L-O. Lucienne entered the code, 6456. A loud click echoed in the room. All three held their breath. The box opened. Inside was a black USB drive, a bundle of documents tied with red string, and a will bearing a clear fingerprint. There was also an old photograph, Andrew holding baby Milo, his face gentle, yet worried. Elena froze. She reached out with a trembling hand, picked up the photo, her lips pressed tightly together. Not a sound came from her, but a single tear fell onto her shirt. Lucien said nothing. He held the USB as though it were a lit matchstick. Every question, every suspicion, everything no one dared speak aloud, could be contained in that small device. That night, back at the villa, Lucien inserted the USB into his computer. Elena sat beside him, while Milo had already been tucked into bed upstairs. The video began to play, low quality, but the audio was clear. It was a secretly recorded internal meeting. The overhead light cast harsh angles on the faces of four people: Sylvia Thorne, Margaret Gareth, and Daniel Crowe. Sylvia spoke first, her voice sharp and cold as steel. Andrew wasn't just planning to blow the whistle. He backed everything up. If we let him live, everything comes out. Daniel added, "I'll alter the will, But I need either a signature or at least a fingerprint. Gareth laughed dryly. I'll handle that. Just make sure the prosecutor doesn't dig too deep. Margaret crossed her arms, eyes filled with contempt. A woman like Elena doesn't deserve to step into my family. Her being alive is a threat to our bloodline. The video cut off. Silence hung heavy. Elena didn't cry. She just breathed, deep and slow, as if trying to force herself not to collapse. Lucienne placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Andrew knew they would go this far. That's why he left all of this. The documents included detailed records of international money laundering, transaction slips, forged certifications, and diagrams linking Voss Group to shell corporations. At the end was Andrew's original will, complete with fingerprint and signature, naming Elena and Milo as his rightful heirs. Lucienne photographed every page, then called a name he had saved for years: Inspector Reeve. They met at a rundown cafe on the outskirts of the city, where no one would recognize a millionaire and a detective sitting together. Lucienne placed the file on the table. Reeve flipped this all through a few pages and asked, "You know this could bring down an entire network, right?" "I'm not bringing them down," Lucienne replied. "They chose their own ending." Reeve studied Lucienne's eyes, then nodded. "I'll protect them, but you need to be ready for what's coming." Lucienne: "I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty. I'm just afraid I'll be too late." That night, the little house was as quiet as if no storm had ever touched it. Elena and Lucienne sat on the balcony, warm tea in hand, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the backyard. Lucienne was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, almost like a whisper to himself. "My daughter. Her name was Clara. She was only 5 when the accident happened." His voice was gentle, as if afraid to disturb something buried deep. "I was on my way home when my wife's car crashed. I was 12 minutes late. 12 minutes, and I've lived with them ever since." He lowered his head. "Since then, I stopped wearing a watch. Not because I hate time, but because I can't bear it reminding me that I was late." Eleanor turned to him. Her eyes didn't widen in surprise. They softened in understanding. His silence, his detachment, had been a form of pain. "There was a time I wanted to leave," she said quietly. "When Andrew became too silent, too distant, swallowed by work." She drew a deep breath. But every night, he still went into Milo's room, told a story, placed his hand on his forehead, even just for a minute. I saw it. He was still there, in his own way. Elena looked into the darkness ahead. Love doesn't always need an apology. Sometimes it just needs someone who stays. Lucien listened like he was hearing a story that belonged to him. He nodded softly. Sometimes the ones who hurt the most say the least. Elena gave a faint, bittersweet smile. Like you. They didn't need to touch hands or make promises, but from that night on, they were no longer strangers. They were two broken pieces, learning to fit beside each other. Lucien looked at Elena. In the dim light, her face seemed more at ease, no longer clenched in defiance. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. Then, after a breath, he said, "I'll protect you and your son. Because I want to, not because I owe anyone, not because of duty or obligation." Elena was taken aback. She looked at him, unsure whether to believe it, but then slowly nodded, saying nothing. It was an unspoken acceptance of his presence in the fragile world she was slowly rebuilding. Lucien bowed his head. Inside him, something unnamed and long buried was beginning to grow, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to touch in years. And now, he no longer wanted to turn away from it. That night, Elena sat by Milo's bedside. He rested his head in her lap, already asleep. She gently ran her fingers through his hair, and whispered, "You did what your father asked of you. I don't know what's coming next, but tonight we heard the truth with our own ears." Outside the room, Lucien stood quietly. The night was deep, but for the first time in years, his heart wasn't empty. Night fell over the villa, nestled in the hills. Moonlight streamed through the curtains, casting silver patterns across the old photo frame on Lucien's desk. In the photo, a woman with a gentle smile and a curly-haired little girl holding a paper airplane. Lucien sat in silence, eyes fixed on the fading picture. One hand rested on the glass, and he whispered, "Clara, if I had made it home in time, maybe you'd still be here. And now, there's another child, waiting for someone to arrive in time. If I reach out again, will you and your mother blame me?" He stayed there, eyes wet, until a passing breeze fluttered the curtain. A drawing slipped from the shelf. It was one of Clara's. She had drawn a house with 3 people in it. It looked nearly identical to the one Milo had drawn days before. Lucien smiled, a quiet, mournful smile, but one filled with resolve. "Thank you," he whispered. "Then this time, I won't turn away." The next morning, Elena sensed something was wrong. Milo was gone. His things were untouched, but muddy footprints stained the wooden floor. The back window was cracked open. The latch bent. She screamed. Her heart pounded. The house erupted in chaos. Lucien rushed in to find Eleanor collapsed, clutching Milo's teddy bear that had rolled beneath the bed. "Milo! Milo's gone!" she cried. Lucien snatched his phone, opened the tracking app. A glimmer of hope sparked in his eyes. "I hid a tracker in his shoe sole. Let's go." The car tore through winding mountain roads. The signal led them to an abandoned warehouse near the old industrial zone, once managed by a Voss Group subsidiary. Lucien didn't call the police. He knew formal interference could make things worse. He handed Elena a wireless earpiece. "Stay in the car. I'll go in. If anything happens, send the tracker info to Inspector Reeve. But first, let me try." Elena nodded, clutching Milo's bear tightly. Inside the warehouse, Gareth stood motionless in front of Milo, who was tied at the wrists with plastic zip ties. The boy's eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. A guard loomed nearby. Gareth's voice was low. "You look just like my brother, even that smug look in your eyes. But luck doesn't run in blood forever, Milo." Milo's voice trembled, but stayed firm. "My dad didn't look down on people. You're just the one who wasn't chosen, and you know it." Gareth sneered. "Oh, I know. That's why I won't let a kid like you exist for long. Your dad thought he could preserve the family's honor by going against my mother, against Sylvia. He was wrong. All I ever wanted was what should have been mine. The Voss name, the fortune, the power. Not people like you." His face twisted in anger as he raised a hand to strike. A sudden voice cut through the silence. "Don't." Gareth turned, smirking. "I thought you'd still be at your fancy villa playing the hero. What now?" "Here to rescue the poor widow and her leftover kid." Lucien didn't answer. He charged forward, knocking the guard down with a single punch. But Gareth was ready. He pulled a knife from his coat and lunged. Lucien dodged, but took a shallow cut to the left side of his torso. Blood seeped through his white shirt. Gritting his teeth, Lucien twisted Gareth's wrist, slammed his forearm down, and disarmed him. The knife clattered to the concrete floor. Gareth, panicked, fled the warehouse. Lucien rushed to untie Milo. The boy collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "Uncle Lucien, I thought they were going to kill Mom too, just like Dad." Lucien held him tightly, his voice thick. "No, Milo. No one's getting left behind this time." Eleanor ran in moments later. She saw the blood on Lucien's shirt and froze. "You're hurt." "It's not deep." "I'm fine," Lucien murmured, though his face had gone pale. "No, you're not," Eleanor cried. She hoisted him over her shoulder, wrapped her other arm around Milo, and dialed for help as she carried them to the car. They rushed to the nearest private hospital. Elena waited outside the ER, hands shaking with fear. She whispered over and over, "Please be okay. Please be okay." Seeing his blood-soaked shirt, one thought filled her mind. If Lucien fell, it wouldn't just be Milo losing someone. It would be her too. When the doctor finally came out and said it was just a soft tissue laceration requiring stitches, Eleanor broke down. Not from weakness, but from the tension finally snapping after holding on too long. Back at the villa, Eleanor cared for Lucien diligently. She cooked porridge, changed his bandages, even neatly folded the blanket by his bed. For the first time in many days, she looked like someone keeping a home, not just someone fighting to survive. Lucien watched her in silence. Each time she leaned over to clean his wound or arrange his medication, his gaze lingered on something he couldn't yet name. When she finally sat beside his bed, he spoke. "I used to think I didn't deserve to have anyone worry about me. But today," Elena interrupted gently, "it's not about deserving. It's about doing what no one else had the courage to do. You saved my son." Milo peeked around the door. "I think you and Mom are really good friends." Elena smiled and waved him over. Milo ran in, hugged Lucien softly, then slipped back to his room. Lucien and Elena looked at each other, longer than before. No one smiled, but their eyes had softened. The walls between them had begun to crumble. Later that evening, Eleanor sent a recording to Inspector Reeve, captured from the hidden camera inside Milo's shoe during the warehouse incident. Reeve, once hesitant, called back in under 10 minutes. His voice was gravelly but decisive. "I need the original and a full statement." "Your address?" An hour later, his car arrived at the villa. In the living room, Eleanor and Lucien met him. Milo sat quietly beside his mother. Reeve placed a notebook on the table. "This is no longer just an internal matter. This is kidnapping, backed by solid evidence, physical harm, and intent to kill. I'm escalating this to criminal court." Lucien nodded. "I'll release the rest of the evidence too. No more hiding. No more deals." Reeve closed his notebook. "Then prepare yourselves. From now on, they won't just attack your names. They'll go after everything you still have." Elena tightened her grip on Milo's hand. Milo looked up, his eyes bright but unwavering. "I'm not afraid anymore. If my dad stood up to them, then so will I." That night, Elena sat beside a sleeping Milo. The marks from the zip ties were still visible on his wrists. She kissed his forehead, then stepped out to the balcony. Lucien was already there. But this time, he wasn't just staring into the darkness. He was searching within himself. Something in Eleanor's recent glances had stirred something inside him, gently but persistently, when she cleaned his wounds without flinching, when she held back tears in front of Milo, when she shyly asked if the porridge was too salty. Lucien had loved before, deeply, and he had lost, terribly. He thought his heart had been locked away, buried with memories of his wife and daughter. But tonight, watching Eleanor in the moonlight, he wondered, when did she start to matter? Was it when he first saw her holding Milo like the last thread of life? Or when Milo called him family in a drawing? He didn't know the answer. But for the first time, the weight of his past no longer crushed him. He lightly touched the rim of his glass, then turned to Elena. "We don't have a way back anymore," she said hoarsely. Lucien nodded. "And I don't want one. We'll bring everything to light. No more silence." Eleanor looked at him, Her eyes held no doubt now, only gratitude and a growing belief. "Thank you," she said, "not for saving my son, but for believing me." Lucien didn't answer right away. He looked up at the night sky. There were no stars. But in his heart, for the first time in years, something had become clear. He would not turn away again. And this time, the light would come. Not just for Milo, but for everyone who had lived in darkness because others chose silence for them. 1 week after Milo's abduction, the hidden camera footage, along with a trove of related evidence, was submitted by Lucien and Elena to Inspector Reeve. The police expanded their investigation and uncovered signs of large-scale legal manipulation and international money laundering. The prosecutor's office immediately called for a public trial. A special witness protection unit was deployed due to clear threats. Public and media pressure surged as every news outlet ran headlines on what was now dubbed the Voss case, one of the most explosive financial and legal scandals in years. At the city's central courthouse, a place where countless fates had been decided, the building was packed. Journalists, citizens, and members of the press filled every space. The names Voss Corporation, Sylvia Thorne, and the mysterious death of Andrew Voss had dominated headlines for days. Lucien entered with Elena and Milo. He wore a black suit, no watch. Elena held her son's hand tightly, her face composed, unwavering. But inside, a storm raged, one she forced herself to keep still. Later, just as Sylvia's legal team tried to stall the hearing by delaying the witness summons, the heavy courtroom doors opened unexpectedly. Henry Caldwell was wheeled in. Since their last encounter, he had regained partial memory. No one from the opposition had anticipated his appearance. Though his voice was slow, his eyes were sharp. He glanced at Milo and gave a subtle nod, as if the truth, long buried, had finally come for its moment. The trial officially began. Eleanor's defense attorney played the video left behind by Andrew on the USB. Frame by frame, faces were clearly shown. Sylvia, Margaret, Gareth, Daniel, each person caught in a self-incriminating sentence. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Henry was called to testify. His hand trembled as he opened an old notebook and read aloud, word by word. I was the one entrusted with the box. The password was a song named after Milo. I confirm that Andrew gave it to me in fear and desperation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Sylvia's lawyer objected, citing Henry's memory loss. But the judge signaled for the testimony to proceed. The evidence was compelling. Then Lucien produced another USB, this one showing Sylvia handing an envelope to a man in a cafe, a senior prosecutor. The accompanying audio revealed her voice. Just keep it from going to trial. I'll take care of the rest. Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor hung his head in shame. The judge immediately suspended him from the case. Gareth was called next. His face was pale. He kept his head down, muttering, I was forced. I had no choice. Lucien stood, his voice like steel. You played a role in Andrew's death. You kidnapped his son, nearly committed murder, and now you claim you were coerced. If this is how you repay the brother who raised you like his own, then yes, you were never worthy of the Voss name. Gareth stayed silent. He knew. Any word now would only deepen the shame. Then Milo was called. He wore a white shirt, collar slightly askew, but his eyes were steady. Elena knelt beside him. You sure, sweetheart? She whispered. Milo nodded. He stood in front of the court, facing hundreds of eyes. His voice was clear and deliberate. My dad said, if grown-ups do wrong and I stay quiet, then I'm part of it too. They said my mum hurt him, but she was just holding me when no one else would. The ones who scared my dad, hurt Mr. Henry, and almost killed me are sitting right over there. A muffled sob came from Margaret's side. She looked at Milo, then around the courtroom. For the first time, no eyes met hers with sympathy. The verdict was delivered. Elena Voss was declared not guilty. Her name was cleared. She and Milo were restored as the rightful legal heirs to Andrew's estate. Sylvia Thorne, CEO of the corporation where Andrew once worked and leader of the global laundering operation, had orchestrated psychological pressure against Andrew when he uncovered the company's illegal transactions. She had financed lawyer Daniel Crowe and manipulated Margaret Granger to remove Elena and Milo from their rightful claims. After Andrew's death, Sylvia fled the country through Malta using a fake passport. But on the third day of the trial, Interpol officially confirmed her arrest at Zurich Airport. She was being extradited for charges including cross-border money laundering, bribery of a prosecutor, and conspiracy to commit murder. Gareth Voss was sentenced to 20 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. No bail granted. Margaret Voss for evidence tampering, manipulating testimonies, and unlawful eviction of Elena and Milo received 18 years. Her request for leniency was denied due to lack of remorse. Daniel Crowe was disbarred and sentenced to 12 years for falsifying documents and complicity in fraud. On their way out of the courthouse, Elena held Milo tightly. Her tears didn't fall from pain, but from release. Her eyes no longer held fear, but something reborn, reclaimed from the bottom of despair. Milo smiled, his first full smile since his father's death. He no longer asked, "When can I go back to school?" Or, "Will they hurt you again, Mom?" Today, he had become part of the truth. A child brave enough to speak what was right. Elena wiped his cheek gently, then held his hand tight, trying to etch this moment into memory forever. Lucien walked beside them in silence, but for the first time, his hand brushed against hers, not holding it, just present. Elena turned and asked quietly, "So, is it over?" Lucien shook his head and smiled. "No. This is just the beginning of a life where you don't have to hide anymore." Milo looked up at them both, then took their hands and joined them. "Then, will Daddy be proud of us from the sky?" Elena knelt, kissed his forehead. "Yes. Because you did what he always taught you. You stood on the side of what's right, even when you're small." The three of them walked out into the soft afternoon light. Behind them was the shadow. Ahead was the light. And this time, no one was walking alone. 3 days after the trial, Lucien received a package from his private investigation team. Inside the envelope was a copy of the accident report, the one that took his wife and daughter. But this time, something was different. The vehicle that caused the crash had ties to a logistics company, secretly owned by Sylvia Thorne. Lucien's hands clenched around the file. That tragic accident may not have been an accident at all. He stood by the window, gazing out at the backyard, where Milo chased autumn leaves, and Elena sat on the steps, watching her son. That quiet, ordinary scene was something Lucien hadn't dared to imagine in a decade. And for the first time since the crash, his heart felt light. Not because justice had come, but because he had chosen to stand for what was right once more, and this time he wasn't too late. After the trial, the truth was exposed, not only in the courtroom, but also under the scrutiny of public opinion. Headlines that once smeared Elena were now followed by corrections and public apologies. News programs revisited the case, analyzing it as a classic example of media manipulation and abuse of power. Milo's school, the one that had once proposed a temporary suspension, sent an official letter of apology to Elena. They arranged a private meeting and pledged that no student would ever again be hurt by an adult's mistake. Milo was welcomed back to class like a little hero. His old friends hugged him on his first day back, and one teacher, with a trembling voice, said, "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you when I should have." But the victory in court didn't bring the peace Elena had expected. 3 days later, she began to lose sleep. Every night, instead of feeling relieved, she felt hollow. Milo slept soundly beside her, while she lay awake, listening to every little sound in the dark. She no longer had to run, but her mind still felt trapped. She was disoriented when she realized she didn't know how to live now that she was no longer a victim. Lucien noticed it sooner than she expected. One morning, when she was making her third cup of coffee without drinking a drop, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder and said simply, "Let's go. Get a change of scenery. This place might be bringing too many memories." 3 days later, they arrived at a small beach in the south. No press, no one knew Elena or her past, just wind, waves, and gentle sunlight. One late afternoon, Elena wrote a few lines on a small piece of paper. "Andrew, I survived. Milo is still strong. Thank you for believing in me." She folded it, placed it inside a white seashell, and released it into the ocean. The waves carried it away without a reply, but she felt lighter. Lucien, for the first time in years, took the old watch out of his suitcase drawer and put it back on his wrist. Not to know the time, but because he had stopped fearing its passage. Milo adapted the quickest. He ran along the beach, built sandcastles, jumped waves, and laughed as if he'd never known courtrooms or shadows. Elena sat watching him play, sometimes laughing too, but her eyes still held traces of sorrow. One evening, after Milo had fallen asleep, Elena and Lucien sat on the resort's balcony. The sea breeze was gentle, the waves constant. She spoke first. "Did you help us out of pity?" Lucien didn't answer right away. He looked at his now cold tea, then turned to her, his eyes calm and steady. "I helped because I know what it's like to lose someone you love and be powerless to stop it. This time, I didn't stand on the sidelines, not out of pity, but because I saw in Milo's eyes the same fragile hope my daughter once had. Something that just needed someone to hold on to. You have no idea how strong you've been, Elena. I just walked beside you." Elena said nothing. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. Quietly, she placed her hand on the back of his, not out of pity, but empathy. 2 different scars, one shared pain. A week later, when they returned to the villa, the house felt different. There was a basket of fresh fruit on the dining table. Milo had taped his drawings all over the living room walls. The armchair where Lucien once sat alone now had a soft pillow. The smell of toast lingered in the mornings. The sound of little feet ran through a space that used to be far too quiet. Elena realized that somewhere along the way, this was no longer the home of a lonely man. That afternoon, while folding clothes, Elena turned to Lucien. "You've done so much for us. I think it's time for us to move out." Lucien didn't seem surprised. He looked up, gazed at her for a long moment, then nodded gently. "Just stay a few more days. The boy could use a little more rest." Elena nodded. But that night, she couldn't sleep. The morning they were supposed to leave, Elena packed their bags. Milo sat nearby, drawing one last picture in the house. He drew 3 people, his mother, Uncle Lucien, and himself, having breakfast under a trellis of flowers. Lucien stood in the doorway. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye?" he asked, not accusingly, but with unmistakable sadness. Elena looked up. "We've imposed on you long enough. I don't know when I'll be able to repay you, but I won't forget what you've done for us." Lucien walked closer. "Before you and Milo came, I wasn't sure I was still a person, or just a shell that kept breathing. If you leave, I'm not just losing you. I'm afraid I'll lose myself again. You don't owe me anything. But if you leave, this house goes back to what it was, quiet, cold, and without light. He gestured around the home. Look around. Milo's drawings gave this wall color. His laughter brought this old clock back to life. You cooked the first meal in a kitchen I hadn't dared step into for years. Elena turned away. I'm scared that I don't belong in the life of someone who once had a whole family. I don't want to be a shadow, a replacement. Lucienne froze, then took one more step, close enough to reach out and touch her. Clara, my wife, will always be a part of my past, but you're not a replacement. You're the one who knocked on the door of a house I thought would stay shut forever. The only person brave enough to pull me out of the darkest place in myself. Elena stood still. Lucian gently placed his hand on her shoulder. If you leave today, I won't stop you. But I'll regret it. Not because I'm losing someone to care for, but because I'd be losing the very thing that made me believe I could live again. After a long moment, Eleanor looked up. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She nodded, just slightly. From behind, Milo called out, "Mum, I'm not done drawing Uncle Lucien yet. Are we leaving?" Eleanor turned to Lucienne, then replied, "Not yet, sweetheart. We're staying a little longer." Milo ran over with his unfinished picture. "Uncle Lucien, if I draw one more person in here, is that okay?" Eleanor looked surprised. "Who, honey?" Milo tilted his head, honest and wide-eyed. "Can you be my new dad?" Lucian was speechless. He looked at Elena. She didn't say anything, just bent down and hugged her son tightly. Then, Lucienne knelt down, gently placing a hand on Milo's shoulder. "If you really want that, I'd be honored. Not to replace anyone, just to be here, with you, the way a dad should be." Milo's eyes lit up. He nodded enthusiastically and threw his arms around Lucian. Elena stood still. She placed a hand over her chest, where her heart beat faster, warmer, unfamiliar, yet comforting. The shadowed days of the past began to dissolve. She looked at Lucian, eyes full of gratitude and emotion. "You know, I used to think no one would ever have the patience to reach someone as broken as me. But today, I don't feel like a burden anymore. I feel like I'm alive again." Lucien smiled, a smile that for the first time held no sadness. He pulled both mother and son into his arms. And this time, no one was left on the outside. The sleepless nights were gone. Breakfasts now had voices, and the house, once a silent cocoon for a broken man, was now the home of a family, not bound by blood, but bound by love. Milo drew new pictures. Elena laughed more. Lucien wore his old watch again, as if no longer afraid of time leaving him behind. And when that school was finally inaugurated, people understood. Some children, if protected in time, can grow up to change the world. One autumn morning, more than 300 people gathered in the courtyard of a new school, where the roof tiles shone a soft turquoise and young trees were just beginning to sprout. Above them, the freshly unveiled school sign read, "Milo's Home of Hope." The first breeze of the season drifted through the air, not cold, but carrying the promise of a new beginning. Today marked the school's very first opening ceremony, and also exactly 1 year since the trial that changed the lives of 3 people forever. Nearly a year after the landmark court case, Eleanor, her inheritance rights now restored, made a bold decision. She used most of Andrew's estate to do something greater, to build a free boarding school for children who had been abandoned, wrongly accused, or silenced when no one else would speak for them. The school's name was simple, but full of meaning. Milo's Home of Hope. It wasn't built in a bustling city centre, but in a peaceful town, filled with sunshine, green trees, and a schoolyard where children could run freely without fear or suspicious stares. On the day of the opening, 9-year-old Milo was invited to give a speech. Standing on a modest wooden stage, the boy faced over 200 people, members of the press, the school's very first students, donors, and even some who had once turned their backs on him and his mother. Holding the microphone with both hands, his voice trembled, but rang clear. I don't remember how many rooms our house had, but I remember there was one person who didn't turn away when my mum and I were kicked out. That person taught me, if grown-ups see something wrong and stay silent, then who will protect kids like me? The whole courtyard fell silent for a few seconds. Then came applause. Then, slowly, heads bowed. Not in shame, but in awakening. Elena was invited to speak, but she simply took the microphone and said one sentence. Today, I no longer need anyone to believe me. I only hope that the children here will never have to beg for belief the way I once did. She had changed, stronger now, braver, walking forward to carve her own path. Lucienne, after many months of living with Elena and Milo, formally adopted Milo as his son. There was no party, no speech. He simply signed the papers and quietly embraced the boy. Eleanor never held a wedding. She kept the last name Voss, but whenever someone asked who Lucian was, she would reply, "He's family, very close family." They were no longer living to fill a void. They were living to build something new. One early autumn afternoon, the three of them visited the graves of Lucienne's wife and daughter. Elena brought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. Milo placed a drawing. Lucienne stood silently for a long time, then whispered, "I didn't make it in time. But today, I can bring a family to say that I'm doing well, and the ones I love helped me find my way back." That day, they also visited Andrew's grave, Milo's father. Elena didn't cry. She simply said, "I kept my promise." Milo is growing up in the light, not the shadows. Milo placed his palms together and said, "Dad, I'm not scared anymore. I have Mum, and I have Dad Lucienne too." Lucienne reached into his pocket and placed an old envelope on Andrew's grave. He spoke softly. Henry remembered. There was a hidden file on that USB, and now we know for certain. You didn't take your own life. It wasn't an accident. The autopsy confirmed traces of high-dose sedatives in your blood, enough to knock you out for hours. The door was locked from the outside. The fire started from flammable liquid spread around the bed. Classic signs of a staged scene. Eleanor stood beside him, motionless. Her eyes blurred, but the fear was gone. She whispered, "They wanted you to fall like a traitor, so Milo and I could never hold our heads high. But now, the truth has restored your dignity, and Milo, your son, was the one who brought that truth to light." Before heading home, they stopped by a small church at the end of the street. The three of them sat quietly under the golden candlelight, not asking for much. Just one hope. Peace. And no more storms. On the way back, the sky opened and rain fell. They happened to pass by that road, the one where a heartbreaking encounter had once taken place. But today, it no longer felt threatening. It didn't rage. It wasn't dark. It was calm, gentle, as if washing away old pain. The house, once filled with silence, now echoed with the sounds of clinking pots, Milo's stories, Elena's laughter, and Lucienne calling them in for dinner. One roof, one family, one new life. On a weekend morning, they strolled together under the rows of trees in the schoolyard. Above the school gates, a large message was engraved. "If you can see it, Please don't stay silent." Lucian looked at Elena. She was smiling, watching Milo play with his friends. He leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Elena didn't say a word. She simply squeezed his hand. And just like that, the old scars still hurt. But they no longer stopped them from moving forward. If you're listening now, please remember, don't stay silent in the face of injustice. Don't turn away from someone just because they've been misunderstood. And if you can, be someone's family. Just like Lucien chose to become a father to a child not bound by blood, but bound by love. Thank you for walking this journey with Eleanor, Milo, and Lucian. May you, whether broken or whole, find your own light, your own healing, and a place you can finally call home. Wishing you peace, strength, and the kind of companionship that makes you feel you're never truly alone.